Europas Industrie.
Industry in Europe, 20% are made with European companies. 35 million people are working in there, and they are responsible for 80% of our exports. Welcome to our live stream for the future industry policy. Wherever you are, I'm really happy to welcome you here. And now I give the floor to the Minister of the State Minister in Hessen, Mr. Weinmeister. We do have a small problem. Mr. Weinmeister isn't there in Wiesbaden yet. I would say he can connect when he is there. And here next to me, I have Kerstin Jorna. She is Director-General for also small and medium enterprises. And I can't imagine anybody more flexible and more into the field. For those who do not know you, you are working for the single market since a lot of time. You worked also at ECFIN, Economy and Financing, and you have worked a lot with Michel Barnier. A lot of people have met him because he is known as the Brexit agreement. He is the one of the Brexit agreement. Now, give us some overview. Thank you very much for the invitation, but I would like to state I want to say you that we are in solidarity with all those who had problems, who lost loved people, all the destruction. And I remember 2002 and 2003. I was in Germany after floodings, and I really remember what we were talking about, how you need to be courageous to restart from zero. Where you have to look for investors. And I would like to tell you that Europe will be backing you. We have teams that are trying to save people. They are in Belgium, they are helping, and there is European solidarity. Now, if we want to talk about industrial policy, we also have to talk about COVID, because this is not something that hasn't changed anything. And if I look to Hesse, this had even stronger effects than elsewhere, minus 3.5% that we lost in our growth. And this is due to the strong role that Hesse has in the field of logistics. And when companies are closed, people are at home, then obviously the economy is suffering. The positive part is that if we look to the indicators and we see if people are looking forward, then we see this in every ecosystem, in mobility, in the digital field, health, even in tourism, where we were strongly hit. This was a big topic in Hesse, but people are really looking forward. And here we want to enter with our strategy. We do need growth, and growth shouldn't be only growth, but it should be green and digital, because we have the opportunity now to do this. Now, I would like to talk about 3 points. First, vaccine, then internal market, and the green model. If I look at vaccines, then Hesse has been the heart of vaccines in Europe, and thanks to Mr. Breton, we also had this strong start, and a lot of companies in Hesse were helping. We have 250 million doses of vaccines. All this has been produced in Europe, and this is enough in order to vaccine all the Europeans, let's say 70%, to give them 2 vaccines, 2 shots, but it's also enough to export it, because for the half of these vaccines have been already exported. Now, the European Union here had a very big role, first of all because these vaccines had been bought for all citizens, and this was due to contracts that have been signed that not every member state was able to have or to get. And we also helped to make this is the COVID Green Pass. This is what you can download wherever you have been vaccinated. With this you can travel. This is important in order that for the single market to work, and in order for you to be able to travel. Now, the vaccines have been the first step. Now we are looking also at different therapies for COVID symptoms, but also for symptoms that will be important in the future. We had a matchmaking in Brussels, virtual, obviously, online, and we had the producers of these kind of therapies, people who make clinical tests in the whole of Europe, investors, and obviously also buyers, for example, big hospitals that do need these therapies. And here, due to the cooperation in Europe, we do have a strong and quick opportunity to intervene in order to have these vaccines and these therapies for all our citizens in Europe. And here I have to say thank you to the government of Hesse, to all of those who made this huge effort. Now that brings me to the next topic, single market. The single market is the basis, and I do not have to tell this here in Hesse, because in Hesse we have a big part of the exports to France, Italy, Austria. And what is imported in Hesse is coming from Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. So we have these chains, the value chains that allow us to work in Hesse. This was not so easy at the beginning of the pandemic. You remember the lorries that were waiting at the borders, and then it was not clear how we or who should be tested, who should be vaccinated. There we can do something more, we can improve. We have the war industry, we have logistics, the pharmaceutical sector, and it's very important that the single market can work. And in our strategy, we said we need a crisis protocol because the next crisis might hit, and then we do need to know who will be doing what, when, and how. Not that we just invented at the moment, but that we have a protocol like we had now in the crisis, and that might help us to have masks or other devices, and we can, our supermarkets that offer everything people want to buy and do need. This is something we have to guarantee. And then we also have this little certificate here that allows free traveling in the single market right now during the holiday season. And my last point is obviously the green business model. How do we manage to do this? Less CO2? Well, we do have 5 points once the juridical framework, financing, the basic products, energy, but also the capacities of the workers. And we are working on these 5 points. We proposed last week a big package with 12 different rulings, how we can decarbonize until 2030, because we said we have to arrive at minus 55%. Now the question is, how do we make this? This is done obviously with renewable energies, with energy efficiency in our houses, rules, how our cars are used in our cities on the streets. And this is the framework. The framework is important in order to make investors to come in. And the second point is that we need enough money for that. And here I would only like to talk about the 750 billion euro that are distributed in the member states. 37% of this money has to be used for decarbonizing, for green investment, and 20% for the digital part. And this is really something that should help. The third point is, do we have the basic products? And there we have to learn a lesson from the crisis, because at the first point we have seen we do not have all the things we do need in order to produce antibiotics, even like things are not coming from Malaysia, because people who are producing the things were all sick. And when we now have renewable energies, we should have 3 times the renewable energy. And we do need magnets. We need rare earth for them, and 97% is coming from China. And now the question is, do we want this? Do we want really to be that dependent on them? And here we had a strong discussion with the heads of state and government, and they said, look where we are dependent in other parts like microprocessors. Now we are considering the fact that the third element, the basic products, should be there all the time. And this might mean that in Europe we might produce magnets, what is done today in China. And that means that we also need to produce batteries. We started with 0 in batteries years ago. If I look at the investments that are foreseen, the batteries for our cars might be produced in Europe, and maybe a part of it might be even exported. The same thing is hydrogen. Why? Because today energy is where we have coal. Tomorrow these energy will be coming from sun and wind. But how can I bring this just to the company? We need green hydrogen. This is easy to produce and also to bring to the different spots. And we have so many actors who want to create a real hydrogen market, a chain, because somebody who wants to invest in hydrogen says, well, probably I do not know if I need or if I can sell this hydrogen, and the chemical industry will not be investing because they do not know if there is enough hydrogen. Now Europe has connected these people. We brought them together, and we have more than 100 projects with investments in the next 2 years in order to have this chain and to have also enough hydrogen. And then my fourth point is energy. Energy has to have a fair price, has to be green, and needs to arrive at the consumer, in this case, in the companies. This is something we put in our package. And then the fifth point, very, very important, are obviously also the capacities of our workers. Many things will change. Look to the automotive sector, and we will have more mobility with batteries, and there we need capacities. And these capacities are not just falling from the sky. Therefore, we are discussing with the employers and the workers in a certain sector in order to see what do we need in the next 10, 20, 30 years, which capacities we need then to invest in order to assure these capacities. And this should not mean that we don't have jobs, but we have new jobs for these people. Now, the last point is we do need a market for everything, and it's fine if we have green steel, but if the automotive sector is not buying this steel, then the other one is having a problem. And therefore, it's not only the offer, but it's also the request on the market. And I would like to mention one example. In our Hydrogen Alliance in Sweden, we have green energy that is produced. With the green energy, we produce hydrogen, and this hydrogen is brought to a steel company, and there are 2 automotive investors that are investing right now because they say we will take this steel for our cars. And this is all I wanted to say. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Before we enter in the discussion, we want also to tell you that you can write streamline LV at lv-brüssel.hessen.de, and you have a phone number 0032 472 030181. And you can see this also on the screen. Mrs. Jorna, you said we need a kick because in Germany we were lucky. We had minus 11% in Spain loss. Italy and France were also more hit than we were. And now in Germany we had a reaction last week on the Green Deal, the big package of the climate policy of the Commission, and therefore also the fear of deindustrialization. What happens if the industry is greener, then we become greener? In our package, we have the carbon border adjustment, Grenzsteuerausgleich, and we want to avoid that things that are imported, or we want to assure that these items are as green as the things we are producing here in Europe. And this is obviously a question of the level playing field. But are we defending ourselves? I think this is also a moment where we should go ahead. We have very good projects as far as hydrogen is concerned, what is obviously true also for digitalization. And obviously you can also invest into this approach. And when I see what is happening in batteries in hydrogen and solar energy. What happens here in Europe, we really have a train that is running, and this is for the markets of tomorrow. Now, as far as the investors are concerned in the taxonomy, I know this is a topic that this is broadly discussed, but this is the standard, the golden standard for Europe and the world. And the investors in the taxonomy want to invest, and the projects are made mostly in Europe, and therefore I think we do have a big chance. So there are 3 points you were talking about. How optimistic are you that you will have, let's say, an agreement in Europe? This was a wish, especially from Paris. And if you are exporting, you do have a problem, because this is creating unity in our market, but not for the exporters. Well, I'm confident that people will agree to this, and not only because our companies need help. If I have a steel company and I change to green steel, then obviously my product will have a higher price and then get lower, and therefore we need that mechanism in the future. I do think then, and I expect important points from COP for green decarbonized products in the whole world. If you look to the US, what Mr. Biden announced, these are huge projects, and also the request for people that are available to do this and who have the know-how. And the hydrogen market will be very interesting. And the Americans also were speaking about a similar mechanism. Yes, obviously. But it's always also the markets for the decarbonized products. And there I do see Europe and the US as a big market, and there will be huge opportunities. And this is the second point you were talking about, the huge opportunities for European companies to take the lead in this field. Now, the Chinese are not sleeping, and we see in e-mobility, China is really heading ahead. How do we manage that we stay in this whole context? With the batteries, we were lacking behind, but then we got it right. And if you see how many billions go into the batteries, this is something really extremely interesting. At the beginning, we were looking at the producing of batteries itself, and at a certain point, that we need lithium, and where do we get our materials? And in Europe, we do have lithium. In Europe, we have a Spanish and Portuguese plan where we have a common project to produce this lithium for with Portugal and Spain, and there we are changing our dependencies. And in other sectors like hydrogen, well, we do have a potential where we will be more independent. And Europe was heading ahead. We are a bit shocked. But in the solar field in Saxony, they have new panels that are much better. They are produced in a different way, and they allow you to collect more energy. And their technology has developed very quickly, instead of giving everything to China and let it produce there. We should produce it in Europe.
Do you see any possibilities to recover on this? Because the Americans are very active in this field as well. Yes, technology has continued to evolve, and now We have to continue to work on this correctly, and we have to use the possibility to produce closer to where the energy is actually being used, where it's needed, and that's one of the advantages of solar panels and the technology. You've mentioned a very important topic of dependencies. And in the communication that the Commission published in May, dependencies were mentioned, and it was a little bit frightening because there was this figure of 52% of products coming from China. And they have looked at over 30% of products in general, and they're already in contact with different companies. What can be done? How can we reduce our dependency on other states? Now, what's very important is that we have a methodology on how you evaluate independence and dependence. There are those who say free trade is more important than anything else, and there are others who say, no, we need to protect our industry at all costs. But what are the facts? What is the baseline for your evaluation? And what we've decided was we were looking at 5,000 product types that are being imported in the EU, and we've looked through this and have filtered out all the products that were limited to only 2 sources, or less, where we are dependent on those 2 sources and have no producers in Europe. And for those, we've looked further into it and filtered out all the products that are strategically significant because they're part of our health, of our security or safety, of our green or digital transition. And that led us to a number of 137 remaining products where we are massively dependent on China, more than half of those 137 products. But another interesting factor is the inverse also true? And we found out that China and the US are also dependent on us, which shows avenues for cooperation. Can you give us an example? For example, the US depends us on turbines and China depends on us for certain green technologies. Could you be a little bit more specific? Not really, due to strategic reasons, yes, of course. But it's a very important topic, and raw materials, of course, are very important for China. Rare earth and magnets, this is going to be an important topic. Currently, everybody's talking about microprocessors because we can notice that we don't have enough for car production, but that's not the only sector where they're missing. And the next topic will be magnets. And the base material for this is rare earth as well. And production procedure is relatively complicated, has 4 or 5 steps, and all the steps happen in China. So even if we were able to find the rare earth, we'd still have to ship it to China to produce the magnets. Now, if I want to have an alternative to that, do I want to create an alternative value creation chain in Europe, or do I want to talk with the Americans? Do we have the know-how? We do have the know-how, but you can also cooperate on this. For example, with Australia or Canada, we have a resource partnership with Canada who also have the know-how. And there are dependencies that we have. There are things where we depend on other regions for certain raw materials, but there are also dependencies that go in the other direction, where other regions depend on us, and then there are codependencies. If we look at raw materials in general, and resources in general, and commodities, there are intermingled dependencies that we have together with Japan and with other countries, and this of course allows us to have shared diversification strategies to reduce our dependence on China, for example, such as this raw material partnership, commodity partnership with Canada. Do you have any contacts with the US as far as magnets are concerned? Well, there is the Tech Council that is subdivided into 10 working groups, and in those working groups we're talking about green technology and about raw materials and dependencies. So this is a core topic there. Yes, I'd seen it, but I wanted to link this directly to magnets, which I hadn't done in the past. Now this mingled dependencies, these interdependencies as far as chip production is concerned, we should not see ourselves smaller as we really are. We also know have others that others are dependent on us as well, that we have a strong trade position. I think that's a very important point here. Now, the shortage of chips and processors and GPUs is currently a affecting the automotive industry in Germany, but is one of the biggest chip producers currently negotiating with Japan, but doesn't necessarily want to move to Europe. Through this worry as well. Chip production requires a lot of know-how and skills. It's not easy, and there are different types of chips. If we're looking at this kind of work, you have to look at through a certain perspective. There are 14 different economic ecosystems. You have tourism, you have digital, you have green energies, renewable energies, and so on. And currently we are analyzing how many microprocessors do we need until 2030, just in order to be aware of our needs, because one microprocessor and another are not the same thing. You can't compare these types of chips. Now we have to look at what the capacity these chips need to have. Well, when you say we do that analysis, how long will it be until you get results? Well, we have a microprocessor alliance that will start soon. Well, just like with hydrogen, we are trying to combine, to bring everybody together, the producers, the users, and to get a better grasp on supply and demand, not only for today, but also for the future. And at what cost, at what prices. Most companies must have realized by now that secured access is a value in itself. It's not just having the cheapest parts and relying on the fact that you can always get it, but just having secured access to these parts. It has an intrinsic value to itself. You have not mentioned the automotive industry in specific, but there are sectors and companies that have worked and operated in that way. Yes, of course, everybody has their own business. Every company has its own business model, has their shareholders that they want to keep happy. But I really think an encompassing change in a way of thinking in these economic ecosystems, because secure access has to be part of your business model. It cannot something that you just ignore. So this really puts me in an optimistic mood, especially for this microprocessor alliance, that we will be able to set up a value creation chain. We will never be able to produce everything in Europe, but to produce a relevant share of it in Europe. And it's very important to be aware of what the actual needs of the companies are. But because if you say today, well, yesterday I would have liked that, well, that's all nice, but we have to look forward in our analysis to know what we will need tomorrow. And experts say that the demand for these super microprocessors isn't even that high in Europe, that we are on the same level we have been for 15 years ago. Yes, but the change will happen quite quickly. And if you have a quick digital and green transformation, the demand will shoot up even quicker. And that is, this looking forward is the added value our work provides, especially in my team that works with me on these specific topics. It's like be forward-looking. Michel Barnier, who you've mentioned, to have always enjoyed working with in different functions, always used to say, you have to look further ahead. And that is exactly what we're doing. Yeah, he's from the Alps. He's organized the Olympic Games. So he is really someone who takes a long-term perspective. You've mentioned the topic of energy. That is a critical topic in Germany, with electricity prices increasing. And in the energy package of last week, there's new regulations for renewable energies until 2030. It should be 40% of the energy mix. That's a fairly high value. We're currently at 20%, so this would mean that we have to double the share of renewable energies within the decade. And industry in Germany in general is very worried about this, that electricity in general and green electricity in particular will be more expensive and not sufficiently available. What would you say to them? Well, I understand your concern, and we've looked into this. How much electricity do you actually need? Because we always look at what will the demand actually be. Because one way is saying we're going to increase, we will have more supply, but supply always has to be in some way linked to demand. In our simulation for the demand, if we're looking at the speed in which the industry wants to invest, steel industry, chemical industry, it is really possible that we could have a lack of green energy, and electrification is a very important factor. It is an unavoidable factor in those industries. So our hydrogen alliance is very important because this is one of the factors that can allow to keep this electricity mobile and transportable. But the green part, we really have to cooperate in order to enable this. And if you look at a wind turbine, if you want to build this, you need authorization by the authorities. For solar panels, there's the same. You have similar problems. And the question is, how these procedures of authorization, are they really in line with our priorities and goals? I mean, you don't need to abolish them necessarily, but they could be faster and more direct. If we're looking at the internal market, it has to function even in a crisis, and we have set up an internal market task force with the member states and the Commission, and we're looking at certain areas that are an obstacle to an economic upturn. And we looked, for example, at these authorizations for certain professions. There is more than 700 professions that are handled through some way or some manner of authorization scheme, and it's not necessarily logical to and easy to follow where do you have to register and how and why. And the member states want to get rid of at least half of those rulings and procedures, because we don't really need them anymore. Why do you always have to translate different documents on top of having to provide them? And this mandate of translation and the mandate of having everything in paper should be reduced as far as possible. And the next topic we want to work on with the ministers as well at the end of September would be looking at authorization procedures for renewable energies in order to find out how, to what extent these procedures are superfluous or too slow. How can we make this more streamlined? Because we would need the equivalent of 600,000 football fields of solar panels. That's the result of the calculations. How do we get those numbers in order to reach the 40% you mentioned? Now, how can this be done? Well, we will also need some wind energy as well. But yes, in order to give you a ballpark of the idea how you can imagine it. Now, if we imagine wind energy in Germany that is generated in the north and is needed in the south, and now we have trouble getting authorizations to move it to the south, or we transport hydrogen in the already existing gas pipelines. That's an alternative. And you think this will be a practical alternative until 2030? It has to be. Of course, you can combine both approaches, but the existing pipeline network is something we need to be able to use for this, and that's part of the discussion in the Hydrogen Alliance. This is about production, use, but also transport. And storage, of course, as well. Now, looking at authorizations and approval, we are dependent on the cooperation of the member states, because you cannot really legislate on this. Well, we always depend on the cooperation of the member states, no matter what we do. This is not something that anyone can do on their own. Germany can do it on their own. Hessen can do it on their own, and the EU on its own can't do it either. Yes, but there are some things that you can influence, yes, but what we have to try to do, as we always try with our alliances or with this task force, is that we want to all reach this goal together, this minus 55. And what can we do together? Where do we set our priorities? What are the real obstacles to our decarbonization of our economy? What's the real obstacle? Well, let me give you a different example. Let's look at architects. 40% of our CO2 emissions are coming from buildings, so we have to renovate those buildings, and there is a lot of money in the plans and the member states for renovations of buildings in order to improve the energy efficiency. Now, renovating those buildings does not only need construction material, but also architects that know how to do this, that know how to work with new materials, that work with energy sensors, that know how to use the energy. If I'm an architect today, and I want to work in a different member state, I need a second insurance, and I need a different insurance if I want to work in a third member state. And there are not that many architects that know how to do this. We need them in all of Europe, which is why it's problematic that an architect has to have a different insurance for every member state he wants to work in. Those are practical problems we want to overcome. Now, I've been in Brussels for 20 years, and this topic of professions is something that has already been on the agenda 20 years ago. So you can just hope that this has become more urgent. Yes, you have seen professions in general on the agenda, and I know what the Germans in general associate with this, but if you look at architects in particular, and architects that know how to build or renovate in an energy efficient way, you will have a very limited scope that is very pragmatic and which will be a lot easier to make progress on. Instead of creating new legislation, that we look at standards. We have to build trust. And if you look at standardization, if you look at ISO standards or DIN standards or EU standards, then we can make progress. Okay, this may not have worked for 20 years, but this is not a reason not to do it. So the Commission is used working on difficult topics. Yes, of course. And we have, there are patents we've worked on for 40 years, and now it's coming. So yeah, it takes a lot of work, but we're making progress. Now, I would like to go back to energy prices because it's something that is really worrying for German industry. Did you look into how electricity prices would evolve and develop until 2030 if we want to reach these 40% share of the energy mix and there's 600,000 football fields of solar panels? So you cannot simulate everything, of course, but and this is very difficult. So we took a different approach. We started at the other end. What's the business case here? What would the business case be? So instead of saying it has to be this much, we first want to understand what's the business case is and how, for example, as a steel producer, I have to invest into the mills, I have to invest into the furnaces, and I have to make sure that the electricity is available, and I have to find clients that buy my product, my green steel. That will, of course, be a little more expensive, and that this will be part of my calculation, how high my energy price can be. So if you look at it from this perspective, you get a very different discussion. Now, concluding question about industrial policy. That's a term we don't often use in Germany because it sounds very interventionist, very regulatory. But I would be interested in how competition policy and industrial policy go together, because there has been communication last year that mentioned that competition policy will be assessed. We have had speeches. For example, at the merger of Siemens Alstom, there was a reaction where there was discussion if this should be allowed. And if we look at greener projects, shouldn't we have champions for those as well? So how do we have to imagine this? Will competitive policy be influenced, be changed? Can it be changed? That's a big question. Of course, we need competition policy in order to have an efficient market. That is very important. And this competition policy is being changed simply by the proposal of the Digital Market Act. There are areas where we will have to regulate more, especially as far as the big platforms are concerned, especially as far as internet services are concerned. Also, smaller companies have noticed this do no longer have the option to not be online. You have to be able to use these platforms, and there we have to make sure that there is a fair situation for everyone active. So if you look at the alliance, it's very important, because without the battery alliance, we would probably still today buy our batteries at very high prices in China and wouldn't even be sure if we would still be able to get them tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. So competition policy has been an important framework for this and has ensured conditions that allow us to act in the way we did. And competition policy is just as important as internal market policy in order to create a fair market that allows for innovation. Thank you very much. This was a greatly timed ending. You didn't have much time and you really just got it all across. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to seize this opportunity to remind you of two upcoming events. Tomorrow on the 20th of July, you will be able to listen to Transport Commissioner Valjan here live on our live stream, because she will be talking about her contribution to the EU transport policy, or rather of transport policy to the Green Deal. And on the 22nd of July at 1 p.m. there will be a discussion about sustainability in the financial sector, perspectives of the taxonomy regulation. I'm very happy that we've had today's event, because I would like to, I wanted to ask your opinion about those events, but we will regrettably not have enough time for that. But I'm already looking forward to those very interesting upcoming events. Thank you very much for your attention, no matter where you're listening in from. I would also like to thank our interpreters, who thank you for listening. And thank you once again for our panelist, Kerstin Jorna. Have a nice day.